World leaders on Sunday condemned the killing of civilians in a suburb of the Ukrainian capital, calling for new sanctions and investigations of alleged war crimes as outrage grew. Russian forces withdrawal from the Kiev region, which a NATO leader framed Sunday as a chance for Moscow to regroup rather than a true retreat, has further revealed the devastation wrought by the Russian invasion. Video verified by the Washington Post showed bodies on the streets in Bucha, a suburb northwest of Kiev, while journalists with the Post and other news organizations found some corpses whose hands had been bound. Ukraine's prosecutors general said a task force has found more than 400 bodies of civilians in the Kiev region. Personally, Ron, I take everything kind of with a grain of salt because there's propaganda on both sides. However, I don't think Ukrainian forces slaughtered Ukrainians in this case. So I do believe Russia has been killing innocent civilians there. But all of this, and I don't want to sugarcoat it, I assume you don't, it's a horrendous war. The Ukrainians have lost a lot of lives. Russian soldiers, a lot of Russian soldiers have died, more than I think Putin has expected to die. But all these things that are happening are now building up the chorus from subtly networks like MSNBC pushing for direct NATO and U.S. involvement to anchors now just directly calling for U.S. NATO involvement. Colin, if we could start, Ali Velshi, who's an MSNBC anchor, he tweeted, "The turning point for the West and NATO will come when the sun rises over Kyiv on Sunday and the war crimes against civilian non-combatants becomes visible to all. There's no more time for prevarication. If never again means anything, then this is the time to act." So there is kind of like the appetizer to the main meal. Aaron Mate responded, "How do you propose the West and NATO act? What are you calling for?" And he says straight up, direct military involvement. So
yeah, I like how we're all kind of patting him on the back for at least being honest. We're just like, well, he's being honest. He wants to instigate World War III. At least he's being honest about it.
Exactly. And you took the words out of my mouth because I tweeted, at least Ali Velshi is dropping the veil and openly stating what MSNBC has been pushing all along. So I'm flattered he has the time on the ground in Ukraine to respond to me. But I had said this in response to a separate Twitter user. I think the U.S. has done a lot via weapons, intel, and troop deployment in neighboring countries. War is an awful thing, but World War III would be way worse than what we are seeing now. NATO, U.S. troops in Ukraine would start a world war with a major nuclear power. So Ali Velshi took a break from responding to others. He responded to me. A number of experts with whom I've spoken say that that conclusion may not be obvious. I love it. May not be obvious because physically defending Ukraine would not pose an existential threat to Russia. Feel free to watch my segments from this morning, all of which I've posted. I didn't have the chance to watch the segments just by choice. So I responded. He, meaning Putin, has consistently said NATO on his doorstep is a number one concern. I think your experts are fairly reckless to basically say, trust us that the U.S. and NATO in Ukraine won't pose existential threat when that is what Putin has consistently pounded for years. I followed up. There's also a lot of experts who spoke of weapons of mass destruction, arming Syrian rebels, which included al-Qaeda, sticking it out in Afghanistan, and on and on. I, for one, don't trust anyone so sure poking the bear of a nuclear power on its doorstep is worth the risk. And he responded, at least he has good manners. I hear you and appreciate your perspective. Ron, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically his way of being like, yeah, I don't want to engage this any further. I mean, it was a polite response. Okay. This is one of those things where people like basically anyone in the corporate media. I mean, we don't even have to single out Ali Velshi, but they have a very, very rigid perspective and a very, very rigid frame of conversation. And that frame of conversation is Putin's a madman. This was entirely unprovoked. And if anyone says anything critical of U.S. imperialism or NATO imperialism or neo-Nazis in Ukraine or anything like that, it means you're fine with everything Russia is doing. And kind of like having that sort of tribal pro-imperialist, pro-U.S. Warmongering perspective, that's an easy thing to do. And that's going to keep the gravy train of cable news, which gets a lot of its funding from weapons manufacturers. That's going to keep that rolling. What's a hard thing to do? Well, the hard thing is to do is the thing that you're doing, the thing that Aaron Mate's doing, the thing that I do, the thing that, other people try to do, where we recognize the complexity of the situation. I'm not okay with what Putin's doing. I'm not okay with that in any way, shape, or form. You know who else isn't okay with that? Just as a side note, a lot of the Russian people. There's a lot of anti-war protests going on in Russia right now. Corporate media is not going to show you that, are they? No, they're not, because that humanizes more of the folks involved with this, and they don't want that. But you know what I'm also not okay with? I'm not okay with U.S. imperialism. I'm not okay with the fact that the U.S. is using Ukraine as a pawn and has been instigating this for 8 years and counting. I'm not okay with that either. I'm not okay with armed neo-Nazis in Ukraine. I'm not okay with that. So it's like, at the end of the day, there are no good guys in this scenario, except for, who the good guys are, Jordan? The people in Ukraine who are going through a lot of terrible things right now. And my heart goes out to them. The people in Russia who are protesting what their government is doing. The people from Russia in the United States that are facing a bunch of xenophobic nonsense because of all this stuff. Those are the good guys in this situation. Who are the bad guys in this situation? Well, the imperialists, whether they're U.S. imperialists, NATO imperialists, militants in Ukraine, or Putin himself. Recognizing the complexity of that situation, that's a lot harder than sort of picking a warmongering tribe like the corporate media will do and always has. Why? Because that's their gravy train, baby. When you turn on cable news and you see commercials for defense industries and stuff like that, why do you think that is? Do you think the average person is in a market for a new tank? No, they're not. They're buying favorable coverage. And it's been this way since at least the 60s. There's been study after study done on it. We don't have an anti-war media, at least not at the corporate level in the United States. You got to go to the indie world to find that stuff.
I think everything you said is right. And the truth is, there's another component as far as the media. The media, I'm talking CNN, MSNBC, their ratings have been in collapse since Trump left the stage. Well, the war in Russia and Ukraine, even in periods where I don't want to say doldrums, because there's been constant attacks, but it's not as new. It's not as volatile every day. They've continued covering 24/7 because their ratings have gone up. And the majority of their audience, no disrespect to my older viewers, not every older person is, falls into this Cold War hysteria. A lot of MSNBC, CNN, definitely Fox News audience came up in their middle-aged years in the 1980s, Cold War hysteria. So they're glued to their TV because they have been indoctrinated. Again, Putin is absolutely brutally invading another country, killing innocents. I don't condone that. But at the same time, it's not wrong to point out that promises were made to Russia when the Soviet Union collapsed, and they have been completely, blatantly disregarded in regards to NATO expansion not moving eastward. But specifically on this, and Ali Velshi, he's not the worst of them. He's not, Dan Rather or Brian Williams faking his Iraq helicopter rides and whatever else.
He's dodging enemy fire right now. Brian Williams is
right.
He's out there right now with his new podcast, Dodging Enemy Fire. It's probably going to drop in a couple weeks. I'm excited.
Right. But I didn't have enough Twitter time to point out, hey, what other experts said to get involved? The generals who were literally trying to trick President John F. Kennedy into invading Cuba. And that's why the Bay of Pigs was so disastrous, because they left out that tiny detail to JFK. Oh, yeah, we're going to have American air support for this. So Kennedy fired, CIA Director Alan Dulles and others. But to me, the problem here is Ali Velshi, as a journalist, you're supposed to have a good bullshit detector. The experts you're interviewing have reason to want to escalate war with Russia. Some of them are on the board of directors of security firms, defense contractors. Others are truly simply think they're really, really smarter and for certain know that, oh no, Putin's bluffing. He would never use nuclear weapons. Well, there's been reports that from Putin experts that his behavior has changed and possibly his mental status. So it's just amazing to me. You didn't learn from the Iraq war. You didn't learn from Afghanistan. And you're quoting to me, MSNBC anchor, well, experts think it wouldn't necessarily, just protecting Ukraine wouldn't be deemed by Putin as a direct threat. I mean, how do you really believe that?
I don't know if they do, to tell you the truth, because I think it's like, yeah, you're saying, oh, they're allowed, they should have a good bullshit detector. You're absolutely 100% right. But, they're allowed to have a good bullshit detector when it's permissible. And it's not permissible when it comes to the agenda of U.S. warmongering and imperialism. You can just look at all the Pentagon budgets. You can look at the economy of war that we've been building for many years and counting. Smedley Butler wrote the book many, many years ago that war is a racket. So it's not okay to have the right bullshit detector on there. That's why everybody who got the Iraq war right got fired from positions in the corporate media, and everyone who got it brutally wrong faced no consequence whatsoever, or in other cases, they even got promotions, for crying out loud. That's a systemic thing. It's not like every single time they're like, we could trust them this time. Oh, wait, they fooled us again. It's a systemic thing. And I would argue it's very, very deliberate.
Right. And lastly on this, I mean, Ron, we're also got to remember, yes, right now we have to think first and foremost about the Ukrainian civilians who are just completely unnecessarily losing their lives. It's a shame. We'll be releasing footage that we got from a freelancer of wounded soldiers and things like that. But also, what about American soldiers? We're going to send American soldiers to Ukraine, which, I don't know, Russia is allies with Syria, with China, with other countries. That could make Iraq look like child's play if we send American soldiers, NATO soldiers to Ukraine, because a lot of these people didn't actually think Putin was going to invade Ukraine, or it would be a, quarter of Ukraine invasion or a half invasion. So to me, do we want, it's bad now, but they don't seem to understand that it could be a lot worse for American soldiers, who the Republicans and Democrats, frankly, pretend to care so much about. Until they actually soldiers speak out against their bullshit wars that have disabled them and things like that. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of concern about American soldiers coming from the so-called experts talking to MSNBC anchors.
Absolutely. There's no concern about that. And I want to add to that too. I've been saying for the past couple of months now, yeah, my heart goes out to what the people in Ukraine are going through big time. But you know what else? My heart also goes out to the people of Somalia, the people of Syria, the people of Yemen. These are all other victims of the U.S. war machines who have been bombed as of recent. So you really need to kind of keep your eye on the prize of what the big problem is and who the real bad guy is. And the bad guy is imperialism around the world. That doesn't mean Russia's an innocent actor. Of course, they're not. But you know what? I'm not going to in any way downplay the U.S. involvement in this. And once again, we are the shining bad guy on the hill. We are the war machine because we have a by-the-book empire. Down to the whole thing of, guess what? People in the United States are facing a declining quality of life. We saw it in its most bare assessment recently, where Joe Biden said, hey, no more funding for COVID, no more funding for testing. We got to put money into the war machine, baby. What do you call that? You call that an empire. What happens to every empire in human history? It falls. We ain't going to be any different. And with the way we're behaving, it freaking needs to happen. It's up to us to determine how brutal or not brutal it's going to be, or at least to do everything we can.
Thanks for watching, and make sure to tune in to Status Coup's daily live stream Monday through Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time and Fridays at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.